How to find your illustration style is one of the biggest questions illustrators ask, and in this video, I'm going to talk about 10 things you need to do to find it. 10 things you need to do to find your illustration style. But first, welcome to the channel. My name is Mr. Tom Froese. I'm an illustrator and a top teacher on Skillshare, where I've helped over 111,000 students unlock the world of commercial illustration. But enough about me. Let's get into the content. Now, just right at the top, I want to say that this idea of finding your illustration style is a little bit flawed, because when I think about finding your illustration style, I think about going out and looking for something like treasure, finding it once and for all, and then for the rest of my life, I'm set with this treasure and it's gonna be all I need from that point forward. This just isn't the case. First, you don't just find your style, it's something that you work out. I'm gonna use this term a lot, working out your illustration style. And anytime I talk about finding your illustration style, what I really mean is working out or work out your illustration style. And second of all, it's an evolution. Style isn't something that you find once and for all. It's something that you continually discover about yourself and about your art. And in my own case, I do have an established illustration style that I'm very confident in and that I'm known for. But at the same time, I'm never quite satisfied just to leave it as it is. I'm constantly thinking of ways to improve it, to improve my craft, to get better at using my existing style in a more versatile way and stuff like that. So the key word here is work out, or maybe the specific word here is work. What all the tips that I'm going to share with you today suggest is work. You're going to have to put a little bit of elbow grease in there, roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty. And if that kind of thing doesn't scare you, then let's get on with the 10 things you need to do to find your illustration style. If as you're going through these tips, you're finding them helpful, please remember to like and subscribe. This is the best way to support the work that I'm doing here on the channel. So the first thing you need to do to find your illustration style is to draw from life. So keep a sketchbook and keep it simple. Just draw regularly from observation. Drawing from observation means drawing from photos or from real life. As long as you're drawing from something that you see with your eyes, that's the main point here. Now, where it comes to what to draw, practice drawing various subjects such as simple or nearby objects. I would also recommend drawing hands and feet, because you're gonna have to draw these a lot as an illustrator. Another thing I would practice drawing is figure drawing. So that means drawing the human body from head to toe. So whether that means pulling out a mirror or taking a life drawing class, figure drawing is a very important part of learning to draw from life. Another thing I would recommend drawing is scenes. Scenes is basically just like what you see kind of in a wider view. What do you see out your window? Or if you look around the space you're in, maybe you can draw your workspace, or maybe you can go to a city park and draw what you see there. Drawing scenes is part of drawing from life. Now, I know that a lot of people don't feel confident about how they draw, and I would just want to encourage you, permit yourself to draw badly. Drawing from life is not about drawing something perfectly or even beautifully. It's about seeing intentionally. Another tip that I'd give you is, if you really are struggling with like the basics of drawing and you want to build up more confidence in this skill, read Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards, because this book will truly help you understand what it means to be able to see like an artist and draw. This is something that I read way back early on, before I even knew that I wanted to get into illustration and design and stuff like that. And it truly unlocked the power of drawing for me. I can't recommend this book highly enough. The next thing you need to do to find your illustration style is to draw from memory. So whereas in the first thing we talked about, we're talking about drawing from observation, now we're drawing from something, like I said, in our memory. You can practice doing this by first drawing from observation and then drawing that same thing from memory. So if you've been hanging out here at the channel long enough, you know that I talk about O mode and I mode. O mode is observational mode, drawing from life, and I mode is drawing from imagination. Sometimes I say it's about drawing ideationally. The point here is that you're drawing not from references. So Again, keep it simple. Start with very simple objects. Try drawing, say, a mug or your shoe from life, and then see what happens when you try drawing from memory. When you do that, you're going to find some clues about how you draw in a more personally expressive way. What kind of things do you forget about when you're drawing from memory? What kind of details do you add? How do you draw those details when you're not looking exactly at what those are? Starting with simple objects is the easiest way of drawing from memory. I would also recommend drawing figures from memory as well. I have 2 classes that will really help you in learning to draw more from memory. The first one is drawing toward illustration. And in this class, I show my process of drawing in O and I modes and how I use this process to end up with a completely original drawing from my memory. The other class I would recommend is odd bodies. In odd bodies, I have a few exercises that really help you learn this practice of drawing people from references and then getting you out of your comfort zone to draw those same people from memory. And of course, both of these classes are on Skillshare. The next thing you need to do to find your illustration style is to draw from imagination. Now, I have to clarify that I call O and I modes observational and sometimes imaginational mode. But when I'm talking about O and I modes, I'm talking about drawing from memory. Here, specifically in this video, I'm saying you need to learn how to draw from imagination without having first looked at references a few moments before. So just like in drawing from life and drawing from memory, when you're practicing drawing from imagination, I would say also draw those same kinds of things. Creatures, people, scenes, and all those kinds of things that you'd find in real life, but just without having looked at them. How do you draw things when you're not really sure exactly what they look like? You can also, of course, practice drawing things that are totally made up and fantastical. How would you draw a monster or a Sasquatch, for instance? Now, here are just a few tips in getting started in drawing from imagination. First, just keep your tools really simple. Use a pencil, use paper or a sketchbook. Don't try to get all fancy with using your iPad or something like that because you're going to get distracted by all the other tools and features. You really just want to practice the process of drawing what's inside of you when you don't have references to draw from. The next thing is to keep in mind that you don't need to share anything that you're drawing. So as you're working stuff out, it's probably going to be a lot of awkward stuff. This is between you and your sketchbook. You never need to share any of this with anyone else. When practicing drawing from imagination, one of the hardest parts is just to know what to draw. Like, what should you draw from imagination, especially if you're not very experienced in coming up with your own ideas or you just don't know where to start. There are all kinds of drawing challenges out there. There's actually an Instagram account called Drawing Challenges, and I'm going to leave a link to that in the video description. And they put out prompts all the time that you can follow and draw from. And these are great ways to find ideas of what to draw from imagination. Now, if drawing from these prompt type things aren't your thing, I might suggest this. Try drawing a city street with buildings, shops, people, cars, and so on, completely from imagination. Fill an entire spread of a sketchbook and get in the mindset of a child. Pretend you're a kid who doesn't need to be the perfect artist. Do you remember when you were a kid just drawing because it was this magical, powerful thing you could do to bring into existence what was in your imagination? This is a great way to get out of the mindset that we should be drawing in a certain way. Another way of thinking about this is don't draw how you think you should draw, just draw how you draw. Now, after drawing one piece or over time, having done this over and over again, here are some tips of what to do with what happens. Observe patterns of how you draw recurring things. How do you draw trees from imagination? How do you draw people, cats, and all those kinds of things? And over time, you're going to develop a symbol language out of these things. You can say, oh, well, this is how I draw trees. And perhaps with a bit of practice refining what those are, you develop a symbol language. And these are things that you can draw without ever having looked at references. And these are a huge part of an illustrator's toolkit. Having a symbol language is one of the most powerful things we can have as illustrators, especially if we're working in a more stylized way, because we don't ever need to look at references for them. We have them on hand and we put them in the scene and there they are. Now, drawing from imagination is hard. And I think out of all the kinds of drawing, and I'm talking about drawing from life, drawing from memory, and here drawing from imagination is the hardest. It's the thing we're hardest on ourselves about. And I think this is because it requires the most creativity. It requires the most kind of personal expression more than the other things. And when we draw from imagination, we encounter our most glaring weaknesses and insecurities. When we're drawing from life, we can blame our subject. We can say the tree was hard to draw. When we're drawing from memory, we can blame our memory. We can say, oh, well, I was just drawing from memory. I didn't have the reference in front of me. But when we're drawing from imagination, we have no excuse. It's just, I drew this. And then we have to say, why did I draw that? Or why does it look that way? In a sense, drawing from imagination is when we're most naked as artists. And so I would just say, give yourself time just to get used to how you draw from imagination. Sometimes we feel like we need to have a drawing style that looks like other people's. And if we can just give ourselves a chance to see what the strengths and abilities of our own way of drawing from imagination are, we can get used to those and actually start using them in a more intentional way. The next thing you need to do to find your illustration style is to identify your main influences. And sometimes I frame this as identifying your inspiration. We need role models for any kind of skill we want to develop in life, no matter what that is, whether that's in art or cooking or parenting. Role models show us what's possible and they inspire us. Identifying who inspires us gives us clues to our own voice or style. So as we're looking for these people, these role models, we want to zero in on people who we consider our favorite illustrators in this specific case and learn more. So what does their work look like? Where do you find their work? How do they make it? And who are their influences? Who are the people that they consider their heroes? And another important thing to look for is who else is like them? What set of illustrators are kind of working in a similar style? You can learn a lot by just seeing if there's actually a group of people doing the same thing. This also helps us realize that style isn't something that any one of us just comes up totally on our own. There's always influences and there's always people who will be close to us in our style. I would recommend spending 10 minutes every morning before doing things like reading the news and email and getting all distracted by that kind of stuff, just seeking inspiration. Dedicate a small part of your day to just get inspired. So go to Pinterest on your computer, on your device or whatever, and look up the keyword illustration plus any other keywords that might interest you, such as retro or people illustration or something like that. The next thing you want to do is just collect anything that you find in a board called My Inspiration. And this is a nice first thing to do. Now, if you want to go deeper, another tip will be to make artist-specific boards. So zoom into one artist and then start collecting images just from that one artist and make an entire board dedicated to them. You get a chance to see more of their work and you can observe variations and similarities between all their pieces. You can actually identify, do they have one kind of style or do they have multiple styles, for instance? An interesting thing that happens as you're collecting inspiration in this way, especially if you're making artist-specific boards, is that you become fluent in the who's who of illustration. You'll find that a lot of the people whose work is being shared on Instagram, they're not obscure artists. They're people that kind of have a reputation. And I think just even knowing who's out there, who are the people working in different styles and categories is an important part of being a well-informed illustrator. The next thing you need to do to find your illustration style is to identify the kind of illustration you actually want to do. Illustration is about solving visual problems in specific ways. If you have an image that you've made, it looks like an illustration, but it's just something that you would put up on a wall in a frame. Personally, I think that's art. That's not illustration because it's not really illustrating something. It's not doing something. Illustration always does something. It helps communicate something. Now, when choosing the kind of illustration that we might want to work in, this is less about choosing tools or media or even like thinking specifically about a style. It's more about how the illustration will be used specifically. And when I talk about this, I talk about contexts. Like, what are the uses, the markets, the subcultures? Like, where is this illustration existing? How is it being used? How are audiences encountering it, right? Now, while the context isn't necessarily about style, like you can have all kinds of different kids book styles, or you can have all kinds of different editorial styles. These contexts have certain styles that work better within them than others. For instance, like if you want to be a kids book illustrator, or if you want to make illustrations for the kids book industry, you're going to choose certain styles over others, or certain kinds of things that contribute to your style over others because they just fit that category. When we start thinking about the kind of illustration we want to do, we start to get specific about these kinds of things, and we can actually start looking at other examples within that category. I think a mistake that a lot of beginning illustrators make is that they just want to illustrate. They just want to get a job as an illustrator. And while at first I think that's really important, we should get any job as an illustrator that we can get. As we go along on our journey, we want to develop this specific voice or this specific style, this one way that our work looks. We need to start being specific in how we envision that work being used. You have to ask, what is your dream project? If you could do any kind of illustration, what specific kind would you like to do? This is the first clue to the kind of illustration you want to do. And then you want to drill into that. If children's books is what you want to do, which specific books inspire you most? Which publishers or which bookshops even carry the kind of books that you like? The more specific you can get, the more you can start to get a vision for the kind of style that you like working in. You'll get a sense of who your peers are or the people that really inspire you the most, because there's such a gamut within each category. And the more in touch you are with your preferences in that way, the further along you'll be in defining your own unique style. Now, you may not know what kind of illustration you want to do. Maybe you're more at that inspiration stage still, and that's totally okay. But as you're gathering that inspiration, be on the lookout for where those illustrations that you like most end up. What are those contexts? And those become your biggest clues to the kind of illustration that you want to make, and therefore the style that you might end up having. Now we're halfway through the tips, so I just want to remind you to hit that like button if you're getting a lot from this content. Let's get on to the 6th point: have a higher purpose for your art. So deep inside all of us, we have this fire of passion and inspiration that makes us say, I want to be an illustrator. Can you feel that feeling right now? Like, if you're watching this video right now, you're hungry. You're hungry to find inspiration and to find your own unique way of illustration. What is that? What's driving you to say, I want to do that? Work to discover and understand what that deeper motive is. So just an example from my own life. Before I was an illustrator and before I knew I wanted to be an illustrator, I wanted to be a designer. It's a much longer story, but really at the heart of why I wanted to be a designer was because I loved visual problem solving. I loved working with things that I could see with my eyes, and it was like a puzzle that I had to solve on the page or on the screen. It was just really intriguing to me. But as I engaged with design and learned more about it and got to know all kinds of things about it, I discovered that I wanted to make things more beautiful. I realized like it wasn't just that I liked the visual problem solving, but there was a way of fixing the world around me in a way, of having some influence and making things more beautiful. There was so much crap out there that I saw. Just for example, I was living in Toronto at the time, and I just noticed that so many of the signs in downtown Toronto were just really badly made. And maybe I could just be someone to design one less crappy sign with badly kerned Comic Sans. And for me, this really carries into illustration, but just in a more focused way. Like, because I very much leaned more toward the aesthetic and expressive aspects of design, illustration really helps me focus on those parts of problem solving. Illustration really is about communicating and having ideas and stuff like that, but it is also very expressive and very aesthetically or stylistically driven. And so my purpose that I had in design to make things more beautiful really comes through in a strong way in my purpose for illustrating. I want to make things more beautiful. So as you're trying to figure out, what's your purpose as an illustrator? It seems like a really big thing to try and ask, right? One possible way to start getting clues to your purpose is to do something a little bit negative. Identify illustration you don't like, and then ask yourself, what bothers you about it? And you could say, is it the style? Is it the message? Or does it just make you feel icky? And as a problem solver, as an illustrator, an artist, what would you do differently? And then ask how and why would you do those things? And these answers, as much as you may not know exactly all the things, but the answers that you come up with are clues to your artistic purpose. It's really what is broken out there and what do you seek to fix? And maybe your purpose is to seek beauty or to advocate for the disadvantaged or to make people laugh. These are all very valid purposes to have, and illustration can be your tool to succeed in that mission. The next thing you need to do to find your illustration style, and it's not just about finding your illustration style, but also just developing as an illustrator in the first place, and that's to learn the industry standard illustration tools. You have to start with the basics. No matter what you want to do in the future, you can't really get that far unless you just have some basic skills, and actually some pretty good skills, if I'm honest. You can't get by without knowing how to make stuff with your hands as an illustrator. And here I'm emphasizing industry standard tools. I'm talking about Adobe Fresco, Illustrator, and Photoshop. I'm talking about Procreate. I know that the Adobe programs are pretty cost prohibitive for some people, especially if you're starting out. So if these things are too expensive, you can try what I would call alt creative tools like Creta or GIMP or even Clip Studio. These are actually good for learning basic principles of digital software. They all have very similar things like how digital color is chosen and pen tools or, those kinds of things. But I do think that if you want to be a part of the industry of illustration, especially the mainstream industry, you do need to know those industry standard tools as well. As you're learning these apps, you just want to learn the basics of each platform, just things like vector versus raster or, image resolution, how to set up a file, how blending modes work, how to use the pen tool, how to work with color in a digital app, using digital brushes, even just using the type tool. And you want to know which apps are best for which styles or uses. If you want to work in a more painterly style, you're probably going to gravitate more toward Fresco or Procreate or Photoshop. And if you want to work in a more graphic and flat style, perhaps Adobe Illustrator will work better for you. Now, how do you even know where to begin to learn the tools, the industry standard tools? I've already named what I believe are the industry standard tools, and I'll say them again. Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop on the desktop, and then on the iPad, there's Fresco and Procreate. These 4 tools are the most popular and the most worth your time to learn, if I'm honest. Now, which one to start with? I don't think that there's any one better to start with. You're gonna need to learn them all at some point. So just choose one and start learning it. The most easy to learn, the most intuitive, in my opinion, is Procreate. And I think Fresco might come in second because you're just using a stylus in your drawing, much like you would if you were a 4-year-old with a crayon and paper. So those are easier, but buried beneath that easy to use interface are all kinds of features and tools. So it's really about finding ways to learn these in more specific applied ways. And so yes, of course you need to learn the tools. What's the best way to learn these? As a teacher, I think the best way to learn any kind of technical tool or skill is in a project. You have this goal of making a fun project, say it's a postcard of your business or your hobby, and then you need to learn how to do that in Photoshop. You're learning Photoshop skills, but the carrot that you're trying to follow here is the rewarding project itself. And I really think that's the most rewarding way of teaching. Project-based learning is amazing for teaching these technical skills. So just one example, if you want to learn Adobe Photoshop, there's this class called Organic abstract patterns in Adobe Photoshop by Evgenia and Dominic Rigini brand. I don't know if I'm saying their name right, but they're fellow top teachers on the platform, and they do this really cool style of making these patterns in Photoshop. And they step you through the steps you need to do to make that project. And along the way, you've learned your way around this important tool that's called Photoshop. So the next thing that you need to do to find your illustration style is to actually be doing illustration projects. These can be real or they can be imagined, but when you're actually working on illustration projects, this is where you're seeing how you work as an illustrator, and you're learning how illustration works. And if you're taking on a good kind of range of different kinds of illustration work, different contexts, different types, different clients, you're getting to know your way around all these things and getting a better feeling for where your strengths and weaknesses lie. What do you like the most? What don't you like the most? What are you best at? What maybe aren't you so good at? So as I'm saying, work out your style by doing client projects. I know that a lot of you watching this are not at that point yet where you're getting illustration projects. So if you don't have clients, here are some ideas of simulating that experience. The first thing you can do is just try a brief generator like Goodbrief or Fake Clients, which are websites that, as their name implies, give you a sort of simulated brief to work through. Now, it's not perfect because you probably don't have a real client there acting as the person telling you what to do, and they're not giving you feedback and stuff like that, which is very important. But in the absence of such an opportunity, this is the next best thing. Another thing you could do is take an actual college level illustration or design class, if you can find one. And here you're gonna get projects that will really help you sharpen your techniques and your critical thinking or problem solving skills, and even probably push you along in your research and communication skills. These are all things that you would learn in a college. Another thing you could do is work for free. Now, I know people poo-poo this idea about working for free, but when you're trying to learn, you can't be picky. If no one's giving you opportunities, you have to make those opportunities. If those opportunities are other people's actual needs, that's better than a simulated project. And I'm gonna say it, the experience will be worth not being paid for it, especially if you don't have any experience to start with. So this, of course, would look like volunteering for a friend's business, or if they have a band and they want a shirt made, or maybe someone's getting married and they want you to illustrate their invitations or hand letter their invitations. These are all great ways to try your hand at some kind of real world project. Okay, so there are two more things you need to do to find your illustration style. The ninth thing is to experiment with traditional media. I believe that all illustration, whether it's digital or whatever, it's all based on the 4 traditional media types: drawing, painting, collage, and printmaking. Experiment in each of these. So drawing, practice drawing in the ways we've already mentioned at the top of this video. For painting, I can't really make too strong of any recommendations here because I'm not a painter, but I have experimented with acrylic, watercolor, and gouache. And just working with these mediums has helped me understand them a little more, especially in how they work in digital form. Just because in Photoshop you have a watercolor brush, it doesn't mean that the digital tool is gonna help you become a fabulous watercolor painter. You need to understand how watercolor works in physical, traditional media first, and then that informs how you use your digital tools. So the third traditional media is collage, and I would put mixed media into that as well. And that really is just scissors, glue, paper, and found materials, cutting stuff up. You've probably cut out magazines before and glued heads on different arms and stuff like that. That's what I'm talking about with collage, but you can expand your understanding of that. It doesn't have to be magazine cutouts. It could just be pieces of paper, right? So the point here is that when you're working collage, it's a more improvisational kind of technique. You don't necessarily need to work from a sketch first. Maybe just as a fun project with the collage media is to try just spending a week of using collage to illustrate or draw simple objects. So maybe limit yourself to 2 or 3 source materials like 2 colors of construction paper, for instance, and give yourself a time limit of 10 minutes and see what you can make. Like maybe you want to illustrate a pickup truck using construction paper cutouts. How detailed can you get? What do your cutout shapes look like and stuff like that? And the final traditional media type here is printmaking. And in its essence, printmaking is the use of ink on one surface that gets applied to another to make copies of an image. And the most basic kind of printmaking would be a rubber stamp, stick it on the stamp pad, and then you just can repeat that image on lots of different surfaces, and it's not a whole lot of extra work for you to do that. So for illustration, we're not really interested in printmaking for its copying aspect. We're more interested in the stylistic qualities that come from the process of printmaking. That's what informs certain styles. So in letterpress or silkscreen printing, there's a certain look, and it has something to do with the fact that you're using very limited colors. You can't use a lot of colors. Everything has to be in flat shapes or solid lines. You can't have gradients or dynamic color mixing happening as it's being printed. And even the paper textures kind of come through the inks that get put down, and you get dry or uneven coverage of the ink. And this gives letterpress printing and silkscreen printing kind of a retro look that a lot of people want to bring to their work. This is definitely something that I bring in my own work and have for a very long time. So of course, not everyone has access to letterpress printing and silkscreen printing. These are kind of process heavy and often very expensive things to do. And you need a lot of space to actually own the equipment anyway. So how can you learn printmaking without access to things like letterpress? So one thing you can do is just digitally experiment, kind of simulate printmaking. You can use something like Retro Supply Company's mid-century print pack, and you can just play around with like ready-made textures made from printing processes, or you can actually get your hands on an affordable art printing technique like lino cut. Lino cut is like you're basically using knives to cut your image into a piece of rubber, and then you're using that like a stamp. I would recommend that you try a Skillshare class called Lino Cut in Children's Book Illustration. And this is another class by a fellow top teacher, Anna Sokolova. So you can find her link also in the video description. This is, again, it's called Lino Cut. It's a really fun way of trying printmaking and seeing how that affects your illustration style. Okay, we're at the last tip, and this is to have a daily project that you make and share. You have no doubt heard me say this before, but there is no better way to practice most of the things covered here than in a daily project that you make and share. To have a daily project means to choose a technique, subject to explore, and to even imagine a context in which your illustrations will exist, like a picture book, and to create a larger series of works. So just for example of people who've done this, Andy J. Pizza of the Creative Pep Talk podcast, he started years ago with this project that he called Land of Nod. And he worked out, I think, 260 characters really early on in his career. And I think what he was trying to work out was like, you know, first of all, he was world building. He's trying to figure out what kind of characters he wants to illustrate. He's working out a style too. But along the way, he's also building an audience, which is an amazing side benefit to that whole effort of doing a daily project. Another person who's found their style through daily projects is Chris Piasek. I'm not exactly sure I'm saying his name right, but Chris literally became an illustrator as the result of his daily drawing project that he started in 2007. And it's 2022 now, and Chris is still at it. And he says that he found his style through this process of showing up every day and just drawing and sharing. And this is no doubt not only how he found a style, but how he built up a following and even got to work with amazing clients. The last example I'll use here is, of course, yours truly. I started drawing and sharing every day around 2007, and I've kept up this practice off and on all the way up until today. These days, I'm drawing every day on my alter ego Instagram account called Drawing is Important, and drawing every day, illustrating regularly, and most importantly in this point here, sharing it with other people is just such an amazing laboratory of style. It's where you get to try new things that maybe you don't get to try in your client work or that you're not getting in your student projects. And because you're doing it consistently, it's that consistency of doing it regularly, hopefully every day, that's when you really start to make small and sometimes big breakthroughs in what style means to you. Now, just a little tip about daily projects. I know that they can be very intimidating because most of us don't really believe we're gonna get anywhere with it, and we probably will quit before we get too far. I think a big part of successfully doing a daily project is just knowing where to start, getting that starting point and having some guidance, something that helps you know what to do and then what to do next. And I think a thing that gets us stuck is that we feel uncreative as we're doing it. We feel like we're not really, like there's something missing or something like that. And I really believe that to do a successful daily project comes down to having a lot of direction and guidance, and most importantly, you setting up a plan that works for you. I have a class called the Style Class, Work Out Your Illustration Style in a Daily Project. And as the name implies, it's pretty obvious. I guide you through this experience of showing up every day and making illustrations and sharing them. There are so many amazing student projects from that class showing how people are making these breakthroughs, but I just want to call to mention Adam Ming, who was trying to work out an editorial illustration style that kind of was also a children's style, sort of like pairing those two things. And his illustrations for that are just amazing. So I recommend you go check out Adam's work from that class. Again, I'll leave a link for that in the video description. So whether you use my style class to get your own daily project off the ground or do it from some other way, I cannot recommend having a daily project that you make and share every day enough. You have to do this if you want to find your style. You have to do this to work out your style. I know these 10 tips are a lot. There's actually more things that I want to tell you, but I'm holding back. But in summary, the 10 things you need to do to find your illustration style are 1, draw from life. 2, draw from memory. 3, draw from imagination. 4, identify your main influences. 5, identify the kind of illustration you want to do. 6, have a higher purpose for your art. 7, learn the industry standard tools. 8, do actual illustration projects. 9, experiment with traditional media. And 10, have a daily project that you make and share on the regular. So I have a question for you before I close this off. Have you tried any of these tips? What would you say is the most important? And what do you think I missed here? Do you think I've missed anything? If you have any things that you would add to this list, let me know in the comments. I love hearing from you. Seeing each and every one of your comments is like a little sparkly moment in my day. So in conclusion, I've listened to countless podcast interviews and watched so many videos here on YouTube on the topic of style because I'm very interested in this topic. And I've heard from a range of illustrators with so many different styles, and they're working in all kinds of different markets and contexts and what have you. And the illustrators that I hear from, they come from a range of styles and they have different opinions about style. You know, some come from art school backgrounds, a lot of them are self-taught. But the common element that they all say when they talk about how they found their style and what they recommend to others is practice. They all say they found their style through practice. Now, in my opinion, the best kind of practice is being thrown into the fire, having to solve real problems with whatever you've got in the best way possible. You need to be willing to fail and to be bad at first. And so if you can get any kind of real clients, that's what you need to be doing. That's where you're going to be forging your ideas around style the most. But the second best option is to do a daily project where you make yourself work when nobody else is giving you that work. So I just want to say it one more time. The daily project is so important. Every single illustrator I know had to start by doing a daily project that they made and shared. That's just how they worked out things like their style, and it's how they built their audience, and it's how they became a flourishing illustrator today. If you're looking to find your style, remember, you have to work it out doing actual work. You gotta roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, and just start practicing. I hope these tips give you some clarity on what that work actually looks like, and I hope they guide you as you go on your way. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. My name is Mr. Tom Froese. I'll see you in the next one.